Hi, I'm Kevin Hickey with the Arkansas Forestry Commission, and you're watching the Caine Interviews on CAT TV, Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Hello, I'm Shannon Caine. Today on the Caine Interviews, we'll be talking with Kevin Hickey. He's a member of the Arkansas Forestry Commission and is the forester for both Washington and Madison counties. Today we'll be discussing forest management, wildfire prevention, and other topics related to Ozark forestry. Mr. Hickey, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your job. What are your primary duties as forester in Washington and Madison counties?
Shannon, the short answer I like to give people is that I like to count trees and put out fires. Of course, it's a little more involved than that. By counting trees, I mean that the Forestry Commission provides resource management advice to the non-industrial private landowners of Arkansas. So we go out and we look at private property and we give forestry advice to the owners of that property. And of course, we are asked to we're called upon to put out forest fires as well. So those are the major two responsibilities of the Forestry Commission.
Okay. Well, let's talk a bit about trees. What are the primary types of trees that we have here, and are there any trees that are specific to this region of the Ozarks?
Okay. The major forest type that we have here in the Ozarks is considered a mixed upland hardwood type. So it's a mixture of oaks. For example, we have northern red oak, black oak, shoe-marred oak, southern red oak, blackjack oak, as well as white oak, post oak, and others. And of course we have ash, maple, many species of hickory. So there's a wide variety of species here in northwest Arkansas. And it's not just hardwoods. We also have pine. Shortleaf pine is native to this part of the country. Eastern red cedar is quite abundant in some areas. As far as species only found here in northwest Arkansas, I'd have to admit I'm a little ignorant about there being a whole lot of those. Now, one that I am familiar with is called the Ozark chinkapin. It's very similar to the chestnut, and as a result, it was pretty much decimated by the chestnut blight earlier in the century. So you don't see it very often. It's still found here, but it's not what we would consider an important component of the forest here in the Ozarks.
Okay. When trees die in this particular area by causes other than fire, what tends to be the primary cause of death?
It's very similar with people. You see a combination of factors that work together. Just as an older person is more subject to diseases such as pneumonia, older trees then become more subject to the insects and diseases that are commonly found in the forest. We have a problem right now with a disease called hypoxylin canker. It's always present in the forest, but it does tend to kill trees that are weakened by other factors. And age is one of those major factors that we're finding here in the Ozarks.
Now, what's happening with the red oaks? Why are they dying off?
The red oaks are being affected by many factors. One is an insect called the red oak borer, but we're finding that there are many parts in the Ozarks, especially on the national forest, which is managed by the U.S. Forest Service. The Arkansas Forestry Commission is a state agency, so we work just here in Arkansas with private landowners. The U.S. Forest Service manages the Ozark and Ouachita National Forests here in the state. They're finding that a lot of the timber on the national forest has not been disturbed ever since the national forest people acquired it. As a result, the timber is very old and is succumbing to old age, as well as the factors that I said earlier work with old age to kill the trees. So we're seeing a combination of diseases like the hypoxylin canker, insects like the red oak borer, as well as other factors like drought that tend to kill the trees.
Okay. How can one manage the insects and pests that prey on trees?
That is extremely difficult to do, and in most cases it's practically impossible. The best thing that anybody could do, especially with yard trees, is just keep their trees healthy to begin with. That means watering them during periods of extreme drought, keeping them fertilized if that's possible. And if a tree is healthy and is growing well, then it's more likely to fend off insects and diseases by itself. If we see trees that are being overcome by some insects, there are treatments, there are chemicals that can be applied. But for an extremely large tree in your front yard, that can be very expensive and practically not practical. So it's a difficult thing.
During the winter months, ice can occasionally build up on trees. How damaging is ice to trees?
Ice can be extremely damaging to trees, especially if it does break the top out of them or if it breaks off major branches. Anytime you have a breakage in a tree, you've created a wound. And again, just like with a person, a wound is now an entry point for other problems. If a tree is only bent over by the ice, the best thing to do is just to leave it alone and let the tree try to recover all on its own. And on smaller trees that are healthy, they can do this quite well. But ice is a natural component. It's commonly found here, and so the forests have adapted to it. Of course, if a tree does succumb to ice, and again it's in your front yard, then it becomes much more serious than, say, a tree breaking out in the forest somewhere. But ice typically is not a problem with hardwood timber as much as it is, say, with pine timber, because the hardwood branches don't, the hardwood trees don't have the leaves collecting the ice, whereas with pine trees they've got their needles year-round, and so they tend to collect more ice, more weight, and then they're more prone to breakage.
Let's move on to the topic of forest fire prevention. The Arkansas Forestry Commission established the Rural Fire Protection Program in 1979. What impact has this had on fire prevention within the state?
That's been an extremely successful program. The main thrust of the program is for our agency, the Forestry Commission, to collect federal surplus property from around the country, mainly trucks, and what we do is we convert these trucks into what are called brush trucks or small fire trucks, which we then give to volunteer fire departments that request the equipment. So for a small department out in the county that is trying to beef up its resources, this is a very inexpensive way that they can do that. That means that when a fire does break out somewhere out in the county, a volunteer fire department can respond to that fire with suitable equipment. And ever since this program was established, I have no idea how many pieces of equipment our agency has given out. The volunteer fire departments here in Northwest Arkansas are extremely well equipped as a result of this program. Then as a volunteer fire department grows and are able to obtain more funding, they're then able to obtain better equipment, and they turn back the trucks they've obtained from us, which we can then in turn give to other departments. So it's been a very successful program in helping to cut down the size of fires here in Northwest Arkansas.
What are some basic rules for burning logging brush piles and other debris in a safe and legal manner?
Now, our number one advice is don't do it, but people will do it. All we can ask is that, first off, they make sure that the area around the pile that they're burning is clear, and they've made a very wide cleared strip around the pile. People need to understand the larger the pile, the bigger the fire, and the bigger the fire, the more likely there is for something to be carried by the wind and then blown off into an unprotected area, such as a grassy field or the woods. So we're asking people to be extremely careful with how much they burn at one time, and to pay attention to the weather conditions. If the wind is blowing 30 miles an hour, don't light that match. And also look ahead to what the weather is forecasted for the next couple of days. We've had people who have lit brush piles on a very calm day. Well, they didn't realize it would take 2 or 3 days for their pile to burn down. And then when the wind picked up on the second or third day, we started to have breakovers. There's burning embers then blew into fields or into the forest, and then a wildfire broke out. People just need to use some common sense and pay attention to the weather.
What is prescribed burning and what are its benefits?
Prescribed burning is where we go out into the forest and conduct a burn, and it can be an area as small as an acre or as large as hundreds of acres. The U.S. Forest Service conducts burns as large as thousands of acres. We are finding that as we study plant communities in the forest, that fire is a natural component of the forest. It has been for thousands of years, and it does have positive effects. Without fire, there seems to be a large buildup of material on the forest floor, and this buildup then inhibits the growth of certain plant species. Fire, when done correctly, eliminates this buildup of plant material, the dead leaves and twigs, and so allows the germination and growth of plants that otherwise would not grow without fire. So we're seeing that the forests are actually healthier in the long run and have more plant diversity with fire being brought back as a component. The problem with fire is that it does conflict with the fact that you have people living in an area. The smoke is a problem. Escaped wildfires can also be a problem if your barn or house is in the way. So it has to be done very carefully. But we are seeing very, very good benefits to burning in the forest with respect to plant communities as well as wildlife habitat.
Does prescribed burning have to be done by a trained forester, or can the landowners do it themselves?
We have a number of landowners that have been slowly experimenting with fire. I work with a gentleman over in Madison County that I understand he received a drip torch for a Christmas present. This is a tool for spreading fire. And so he's become quite adept at it. So people can do their own burns, but they need to know what they're doing and be aware of the consequences of their actions.
How big a problem is timber theft locally, and what can be done to prevent it?
Timber theft is not a big problem here in northwest Arkansas. The timber is not as valuable here as it is, say, in other parts of the state. And so there just isn't the payoff for someone to run the risk of stealing timber, but it has occurred. The main thing with preventing timber theft is for people to actually visit their property from time to time and see what's out there. The last case of timber theft that I'm aware of here in northwest Arkansas occurred because the property owners lived in Texas. They had not visited their property in many years, and then when they finally returned to it, that's when they found that the timber had been cut in their absence. We tracked down the folks who did it. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations had run out, so the thieves were not around to be prosecuted, or could not be prosecuted.
What about illegal dumping? What effect does that have on forests?
Illegal dumping is a growing problem, again, because we're seeing the growth of population here in northwest Arkansas. And we're finding many areas that used to be wooded or considered out in the country are now bumping up against subdivisions. And we're seeing a lot of folks building their homes without taking advantage of regular trash pickup. And so they're finding other places to put their trash. I don't know if a single incidence of illegal dumping is going to have much of effect on the forests, but with as much of it as we are seeing, every little bit will add up. It's not much of a problem if it's just regular household garbage, but when you have other chemicals added in, such as motor oil, paints, things like this, these chemicals can escape the trash bag or whatever container they're in and then get into the water supply. We still have a number of people living out in the county who obtain their water from wells, and it's entirely possible for their well water to be contaminated by illegal dumping. So even though it's not a huge threat, it is a problem that needs to be addressed, and the Forestry Commission has been empowered to enforce anti-dumping laws, and we will write citations when we can find illegal dumpers.
How does the timber industry work in conjunction with forestry officials in northwest Arkansas?
Because of the nature of our forests here in northwest Arkansas, we do not have the timber industry that exists in other parts of the state. For example, you don't see the large timber companies such as Weyerhaeuser or International Paper here in northwest Arkansas. Instead, most of the timber industry here consists of much smaller operators. essentially family-run operations. But there are companies here that do hire their own foresters, and those folks work with us in promoting the replanting of land that has been harvested. We try to work with representatives of the local industries to let them know about programs landowners can take advantage of, so that when the timber industry folks meet with the public, they can spread the word that there are programs out there that will help folks with replanting, as well as help them with other things that they would find beneficial.
So the Arkansas Forestry Commission can assist individual landowners with issues of forest management?
Yes, that's one of our primary jobs that we do. There are foresters throughout the state, and we do work with private landowners to help them make the right decisions towards managing their forests.
Can the proper placement of trees on one's property lead to a lower risk of soil erosion?
Any type of vegetation growth, once it's established, will help hold the soil and prevent erosion. In terms of planting trees around one's home, I don't know if that in itself would help prevent erosion, but anytime you can get plants established on open or bare ground, that's going to help hold the soil in place, and that's what's going to prevent erosion, and we're always in favor of that.
Can good forestry practices help ensure regional water quality protection?
Oh, absolutely. Again, when we have open areas that lack a good vegetative growth on it to help hold the soil, you're going to see more runoff, you're going to see more mud, if you will, in the water. And so anytime those areas can be replanted, or anytime that we can quickly reestablish growth in disturbed areas, we're going to maintain soil and water quality.
Let's say that someone had trees on their property and wanted to harvest that timber. Is there more to harvesting than just cutting down the trees?
There are many things to consider when one's harvesting timber. For example, how they want the property to look when it's done. I think many people are surprised at how bad the overall job looks, but that's to be expected when you harvest trees. You are disrupting the appearance of the property, you are disrupting the plant communities, you're disrupting the wildlife anytime you harvest. The initial effects can be, upsetting to a lot of people, so you have to look at the long-term effects. There can be many positive benefits to harvesting. You are manipulating what's out there in the forest, and that manipulation can achieve results that landowners can find very beneficial and pleasing. So there are things to consider, such as the types of trees to be cut, when they are to be cut, whether or not the trees are to be marked for cutting, or do you just let the logger take whatever he or she wants. You also have to look at perhaps replanting if that's going to be necessary. In many cases here in northwest Arkansas, replanting is not usually necessary because loggers don't take everything. There are plenty of trees left after a harvesting job to hold the soil and to help filter the water. But for someone who does want to start with a clean slate, as it were, on a piece of property, and they want to harvest everything off of it, then they need to have made plans for replanting immediately.
Can one purchase tree seedlings directly from the Arkansas Forestry Commission?
Yes. Most states have their own seedling nurseries, and Arkansas is one of those. We provide a variety of hardwood seedlings for sale, as well as a couple of species of pine. And so we ask that people consider purchasing those seedlings from us in the summer months, so that they can then receive their seedlings in the spring when it's tree planting time. If you wait until spring to order your trees, you may find that the species you want has already been sold out. In addition to the state nurseries, there are private nurseries available too where people can obtain seedlings. But we are set up to distribute those seedlings throughout the state, and so we can get seedlings to people here in the local area very quickly and in good condition.
What types of educational programs does the Arkansas Forestry Commission sponsor?
We're sponsoring a couple right now that seem to be very well received. One is Project Learning Tree. This is a program that's geared towards fifth graders. And we would like to be able to get into most of the fifth grade classrooms throughout Northwest Arkansas and put on a Project Learning Tree program. The program has activities for the students, and these activities can incorporate other lesson plans, such as reading, writing, arithmetic, the usual things. But they show students some aspect of forestry and how it pertains to them in their everyday lives. We also use Project Learning Tree programs whenever we sponsor a Forestry Awareness Day, and this is where we take students out into a forested area, and we use other experts, such as wildlife biologists, soil conservationists, and others, to help put on these programs. And again, the idea is to get the students into a outdoor environment, perhaps one they've not experienced before, and show them how important forestry is to them. Another program that we are just recently been promoting is called Firewise. And this is a program where we would like homeowners especially to be aware that if they build a house out in a country setting, it may be at risk from threat of wildfire. I think most folks who watch the news are aware of the very serious wildfires out west and the homes that are consumed out there. We have the potential to have something very similar happen here in Northwest Arkansas. Again, because of the population growth, we're seeing a lot more homes in areas that were once considered out in the country. And so we're telling folks that they need to be very careful when they build their home about making sure that burnable materials are not left right up against the house, so that if a wildfire were to come through the forest next to the home would not be threatened. So Firewise is gaining importance, especially here in Northwest Arkansas.
You had mentioned earlier writing citations, and what law enforcement capacity do the foresters have? Are you now you're able to actively enforce forestry legislation, right?
That's correct. The writing of citations for illegal dumping only occurred just recently, but for quite some time now we've been able to write citations for wildfire problems. For example, if someone were to burn some trash and that trash fire were to get out, if it stayed on that person's property, we'd probably only issue them a warning. However, if that fire were to cross over onto a neighbor's piece of property, we would have to issue them a citation. We do have at least one person in each county that can write these citations, but we also now have full-time law enforcement investigators on staff to help us with special problems, such as timber theft, if that were to occur, or if we were to get into an arson problem. We would have these investigators come up and take the lead in trying to determine who's doing that. And so we do have some law enforcement capabilities, but not a lot.
Speaking of legal issues, is it a crime to vandalize or destroy equipment that's used in the timber industry?
Absolutely. Well, any sort of destruction of private property is going to be against the law. There's nothing specifically special about vandalized forestry equipment, except that those tend to be issues that, although they're important to local law enforcement, probably don't compare against the more serious crimes. And so in order to assist local law enforcement, again, the Arkansas Forestry Commission has been given the authority to help investigate the vandalization or destruction of forestry equipment. It's just a courtesy to local law enforcement, so that the sheriff's office isn't bogged down with those types of incidents, even though it's serious to the owner of the equipment. Again, the sheriff's office probably has more important things to do. So again, the Forestry Commission can investigate and does investigate those types of problems.
How would one pursue a career in forestry? Does it require a college degree or other kinds of specialized training?
We have different levels of participation within the commission. We have our rangers, we have a county ranger, we have foresters, as well as folks that work with us with other specialized skills. in order to work as a county forester, one does need a forestry degree from an accredited university, either here in Arkansas or one of the other states. But we do have folks that work with us that have a high school diploma. They are equipment operators, or they assist me in the woods. And so we're looking for folks that have outdoor experience, or they have heavy equipment operation experience, or they have some other specialization that we can utilize.
What do you like the most about your job as a forester, and also is there anything that you dislike about it?
Well, I have to say that when the weather's nice, it's always good to be paid to go hiking out in the woods, which does occur. However, when it's 100 degrees and you're covered in ticks and chiggers, you kind of wish you had a desk job somewhere. I get a lot of gratification from being able to work with folks and answer their questions and help them achieve their long-term management goals for their property. When the red oak borer was a very serious problem and in the news a lot, I had a lot of calls from folks who had been told that they needed to cut and sell their timber before the red oak borer killed it. Well, these were scare tactics, and these folks were scared, and so I was able to go out and look at their property and assure them that their timber was just fine. The red oak borer was not a serious threat to them. That's always a good part of the job. I become very frustrated when I'm asked questions that I can't answer, simply because I'm a generalist. I'm supposed to work in all areas of forestry. And so when folks call me up and they ask me why their yard tree is dying, and I go and I look at it, it's frustrating when I tell them, well, I just don't know. I'm not a forest pathologist. I don't have the equipment to be able to delve into what would actually kill a tree. So there are many good things about the job, but there are other things that I wish I could improve.
Now, if any of the viewers out there have forest land on their acreage and are seriously interested in preserving those woodlands, what should they do?
I don't like to use the word preserve. I like to consider what we do as conservation. It's the wise use of property. The forest, one way of looking at it is the forest cannot be preserved. They're always in a state of change. The change can occur very slowly. Maybe it's not even visible, but you can't always keep things exactly the way they are. But if folks are interested in maintaining the health of their forest, by all means they can give us a call. We'll be happy to come out and take a look and see if there's some things that they can do. They just need to be aware that whatever they do, it's either going to cost them time or money, and they need to be prepared to make some sort of investment like that. Otherwise, they're just going to have to accept things the way they are.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show. And that's all the time we have for this edition of the Caine Interviews. I'm Shannon Caine. We'll catch you next time.